When will my troubles end? Black night is falling. I hate to be alone. I've got no one to talk with, tell my troubles to. Don't even know I'm living since I lost you. Black night is falling. I hate to be alone. I keep crying for my baby, and now another day is gone, long gone.
Cowards in the halls of Congress, bending to the will of the NRA. They really know there's an answer. Hiding plain sight, they always get their way with this crap about thoughts and prayers. It's too early to talk about what's going on. They read from the same old script as they embrace the victim, keep moving on. Why don't you look into the mirror and answer these questions I have for you? When is this gonna stop? What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
That is not dire straits, but we are in dire straits. 1 year ago today, folks, on this date, a gunman opened fire at Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and massacred 17 people. You are now listening to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven, and we're marking that anniversary with Steve Mednick and a new album he has out. You're getting a preview of it as we speak. Steve, for decades, has practiced law and been involved in politics in New Haven. He's developed a second career as a songwriter, recording artist, and performer. He has a new album out inspired in large part by the Parkland massacre and calling us to action. The album is called Enough. Steve is here in the WNHH studio to preview some of these songs, talk about his project, and help us mark this cruel anniversary with the perspective of a year's distance. Welcome back to WNHH, Steve.
Good to be here, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. The song you're listening to now is track 1 off of Enough. What are you going to do? Those first lyrics you heard was cowards in the halls of Congress, bending to the will of the NRA. They really know how to get their way. They really know that there's an answer. Hiding in plain sight, they always get away with this crap about thoughts and prayers. Here's the end of the song. We'll be right back with you.
I hope she didn't die from nothing. Look at my eyes, cause the blood is on your hands. This has become the new normal. Why does this happen in our freedom land? Once every 60 hours, we lose more children in their schoolyards. When is this gonna stop? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna save our children? What are you gonna do? No more guns. No more guns. No more prayers. No more prayers. No more silence. No more silence. No more tears. What you gonna do?
Whoa. Once every 60 hours, we lose more children in their schoolyard. Why does this happen in our freedom land? When is this going to stop? What are you going to do? Are you going to save our children? No more guns, no more prayers, no more silence, no more tears. What are you going to do? Steve Mednick was singing that passionately. The Harry Joseph Station Manager talks about how passionate and sincere your music. And boy, this is true. So, folks, you're getting a sneak preview 1 year after the massacre at Douglas High School, Marjorystown Douglas High School in Parkland, of Steve Mednick's new album, largely inspired. 7 of the songs inspired by that massacre and a call to action. The album's called Enough. Steve, are they going to be playing this at gun control rallies? I could hear this one blaring out of the...
if invited, on the album, I ask people to support gun control and cite a number of organizations from Sandy Hook Promise here in Connecticut.
If you get a little closer to the mic.
Yeah, to Every Town for Gun Control. And
you can move the mic down if you want.
The Brady campaign and a wide variety of entities. So, yeah, I'm happy to participate if I could.
And how about Gabrielle Gifford's husband? She was shot by a gunman, and he's running now for Senate, I guess it is. In Arizona.
No, they've been extraordinary advocates, and I think on that issue alone, he should get to the Senate.
So Steve Mednick, you put out this album Enough, and it's not out yet, right?
It's not out,
but pretty soon it'll be out.
I hope.
On I guess people can get it on.
It would be on CD Baby, Amazon, whole range of things.
So, but we're going to give people a sneak preview today on the show. We're going to play a bunch of songs. We're going to talk to you about it. And the first thing I want to ask you, Steve, is why? Why did you decide to put out an album and write a whole bunch of songs about the massacre at Parkland?
Well, it's just not that's what ultimately triggered the album. But so much came out literally a year ago today, and the surviving children, the parents of kids who were victims, really grabbed this issue and fought with this issue. And we had some of that with Sandy Hook. We had a lot of,
but much more with this because you had teenagers. Yeah, Sandy Hook was little kids.
Yeah, and you had these incredibly passionate and articulate teenagers and parents who were just willing to take the issue on.
And then you had the right-wing noise machine that first said that the Sandy Hook parents made up the massacre.
Yep.
You know, like Alex Jones and all these people get repeated on Breitbart and Daily Caller and stuff. And now some people on Fox
crisis actors.
Fox News.
Yeah.
I mean, the most watched news show that some people even in this very studio believe in, they were attacking the Parkland people as liars and phonies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. And crisis actors was the term I remember. And so I felt that, I mean, over the years, I'd done a number of songs that are political. I've released, 15 albums and 4 of
15 albums?
Yeah.
It's more than the Beatles.
Yeah, actually.
As a group.
I'm a little under John Lennon and Paul McCartney's output. They're 209. I've published 190 songs, but they get their royalties are far more substantial than mine. No doubt about it. But I've written a number of songs over the years, and I thought that the time had come to try to see if I could write, I'm not going to call it a suite of songs, but a series of songs that were influenced by the same incident.
And why? Why do you feel the moment is right? We've had school shootings going all the way back to Columbine in the 90s. Why was this the moment that Steve Mednick was going to put out an album of heartfelt songs and a call to action about guns?
I was terribly, I was moved by it. I wrote a song for Sandy Hook, the Angel song that I wrote about 5 or 6 years ago.
That was a good one. Angels Are Crying.
Yeah,
right?
The Angels Are Crying.
Yeah.
And I've written songs over the years that mention all of the many of the shootings. You can't keep up with them. That's the fundamental problem. You can't develop a historical perspective because this is us today. This is the way we are living.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that so much came out of it. And as I was reading, I think I told you this in advance, as I was reading newspaper accounts, listening to people on television and radio, there were so many things that just kind of compelled me. Words that were used, phrases that were used. A couple songs from now, the song "Weapons of War" came from one of the speeches that the kid gave. Was incredulous.
Well, tell me about that.
Yeah, incredulous that we could be selling weapons of war on the streets of the United States of America. You might want to put the song on now, but it was just that phrase and that way of expressing
the words of the songs are not a transcript of what people said. You were inspired by what people said and did.
Yeah, and
you were inspired by one student. It was
one student. I don't remember the student.
He said weapons of war.
He said weapons of war are being sold on the streets of America.
All right, let's hear the song that Steve Mednick wrote, inspired by the Douglas student who said weapons of war. Why are they being sold on the street? Here's your sneak preview, New Haven. Steve Mednick's new album, Enough, track 4, Weapons of War.
It's my right, I'm told. I can buy it now. Freedom's just another word. Don't tell me what I can do. This is part of my legacy. It's my right as an American boy. Says so in the Constitution.
Does it really?
I wanna buy me a weapon of war, weapon of war, weapon of war. I wanna buy me a weapon of war to stop the federale. Blood on the hands of the NRA, they're dancing marionettes. They buy their votes, sell their wares. All these lying phonies. I walk in the path, my father, the shepherd of my youth. For all my days, he redeemed me from all harm. Why you buying a weapon of war, weapon of war, weapon of war? Why you buying a weapon of war? It's an assault on our nation. Ever been on the wrong end of a gun and right between your eyes in the pitch black dark, fear in your eyes while hiding in a closet? I ain't no crisis actor, you wear a magic shade. Silent shatter, distant gunshots coming my way. Are these my last moments? Why do you sell weapons of war, weapons of war, weapons of war? Why do we sell weapons of war to hurt our little children? Why do we sell weapons of war, weapons of war, weapons of war? Why do we sell weapons of war to hurt our little children, to hurt our little children, to hurt our little children?
Weapons of War. A track number 4 on Steve Mednick's new album, Enough. Soon to be released. Being previewed here today. The first anniversary of the Parkland, Florida high school massacre. Gunman shot 70 people to dead. You're hearing it. 70 people death. You're hearing it here for the first time on Dateline, New Haven. WNHH 103.5 FM live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So Steve Mednick, you got that idea you said from a student who said weapon of war, why are they selling these? And in the song, first of all, you decided, unlike the first song, which had a real dire straits / anthemic feel, in my opinion.
Mhm.
You agree with that?
Yep.
First one, I could hear it blaring at a rally. This, I think you wrote in the style of sort of a Woody Guthrie era, early Dylan, whereas the federales are in it. Is that an
Correct,
E
yeah.
minor? You playing that in E minor?
Yeah, it's an E minor song.
Yeah, and sort of like it has that feeling of timelessness where you're taking today's context in sort of an outlaw mode of folk song in the old context, but with putting it in the minor key with a foreboding.
Well, that's correct. Peter Yarrow could have done this
Really?
song. Yeah, I think Peter Yarrow could have done this song.
I'm thinking more like
it could have been Guthrie. It could have been.
yeah, I could hear all of Guthrie
I'm
singing
flattered.
this
Yeah,
song.
but it was done in more of the folk tradition.
But you also did it with two voices. You had the question raised,
Yeah,
and you're sort of answering it in the voice of the person buying the weapon and wanting to feel powerful at doing the massacre.
the voice changes,
And then the
throughout
voice
song.
changes,
Yeah.
and then you give the response,
Correct.
going against the
Yeah.
NRA.
And then I have
Nice job.
Natalie Modugno saying, "Is it really in the
Yeah.
Constitution?" Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah.
So you had that line. It says so in the Constitution, and does it really? That's really one. As the fight for gun control continues in its next phase, I think you probably agree as a lawyer. You know so much more about this than I do, Steve. That at the heart of the fight now is how we interpret the Second Amendment, which says that we have the right to raise a militia. Now, until long after you and I were born, the interpretation in the country, up to the Supreme Court, was that doesn't mean everybody has a right to get a gun and shoot people. It means the people can have a people's militia. And this was about what happened when we were colonies, correct?
That's correct.
And we can rise up against
Yeah.
a tyrant.
Yeah.
It never was intended or understood to be intended to mean everybody can have a gun and get as much ammunition as they want, use it whenever they want, and that the government can't get in your way as an individual. However, there's a school of thought now that may be represented by a majority of the Supreme Court that calls itself the originalist school. They claim that the way they interpret the Constitution is what was meant in the 1700s when the Constitution was drawn up, which obviously we're biased, Steve, you and I, we believe that that's a bunch of crap and that they always try to find an answer and then pretend they're claiming original intent. And unless it doesn't give the right outcome, like Scalia on Obamacare changing what he just wrote in a book about how to interpret interstate commerce clause.
Well, like Scalia on the Second Amendment. I mean, if you want to look at original intent, from my perspective, I'm fine with original intent. If you want to say that there's a right to bear arms,
I think that's bogus.
I think it's totally bogus. But
Yeah.
but I'll accept your argument if you want to limit it to muskets. And I mean, they couldn't possibly.
But was the intent that every individual could pick up a musket and shoot anybody if they want?
No, it was hard. When you look at the history of the Second Amendment, there's a few terrific books out at it. Number one, it was the most unlitigated amendment in the Constitution. Through the 1970s and 80s, it was barely litigated in this country. And I remember Chief Justice Berger condemned the movement toward litigating this and coming up with this concept. So conservative jurists, through the 1970s, this had not been an issue. In the 1970s and 80s, the NRA began to move further to the right. The NRA was a gun rights organization, but really a gun protection organization.
The NRA was against people having the right to openly carry guns in California in the 1960s when the Black Panthers
when it was Black Panthers,
advocated for it.
And they were against Tommy guns in the 1930s and the 1940s, and they were really supportive of gun protections and gun safety. That was in the 70s and the 80s as they began to move.
Well, you know, as someone who has no interest in guns, is scared of guns, doesn't think people should have guns, I could support that NRA because I do respect people who hunt, even though I'm a vegan. I respect people who feel they need it for self-protection and like get trained in it and are very careful. They don't have millions of fast, repeat weapons that can mow down cops and, have all this assault weapons. So I could get behind that vision of the NRA, even though it's not my outlook. So what happened? What changed that legally?
What changed it? You ended up with the Federalist Society and.
But Federalist Society claims they go for original intent and they're smart.
Well,
so why are they saying that something that of all jurists through into the 21st century, almost still, we're all saying on all sides that is not what was originally meant in the Constitution?
Well, I don't see how it could have been meant as it is.
But
in the
now
Constitution.
there's a majority. It seems like on the Supreme Court.
Well, the NRA leaves out the most important clause of the Second Amendment regarding the militia. If you go into their headquarters, the right to bear arms is there, but there's nothing about the militia, and that's what they've done. They've extracted that important provision, that important proviso, out of the amendment.
Now, people on our side who are for gun control. We do need to acknowledge that while we think that's a completely bogus argument, which might have big consequences of gun control going forward, that we're not necessarily right on some of the stuff we argue. I mean, there are really two sides to whether gun control keeps people safer. We point to Connecticut had the strongest gun control laws enacted in the nation, and we've had fewer shootings because that, and states with the laxest gun control have seen it gone up, like in Mississippi, right? But it's still hard to prove cause and effect. And there's so many guns out there. We have so much more gun ownership than almost any place else in the world that you're not necessarily, sometimes gun control does keep it out of people who don't pose a threat, and people who pose a threat can go and buy those guns anyway, and they're going to get them. And a lot of times people who legally have guns are the problem. So while I do believe in gun control, I do recognize there are two sides to the arguments about what will work. But what I hear in your songs is this crazy turn that the NRA has taken, and it's not just as much money as like the bodies they get out to elections for candidates.
Well, this last election cycle, they were defeated. Bloomberg and a lot of other people funded a number of candidates and funded a number of initiatives around the country, and the NRA was on its back heels. And I think that hopefully there will be a reversal of that. Hopefully there will be common sense gun reform. There'll be regulatory issues and registration that will be addressed. There's widespread approval among all ideologies in this country for common sense gun reform. I would go much further than most of these things. I would bring the assault rifle ban back on. I just don't
Why do you need an assault rifle?
What do you need an assault rifle? Hunters don't need assault rifles. It's not something that's going to be protective. One of the other things that I always am perplexed about is when you talk to people is that say, well, you've never had a gun in your house. What were you going to do to protect your family? Well, if you're a responsible gun owner, your ammunition and your gun are in two different places.
Also, more people get accidentally shot. I mean, I think of the one unfortunate case of New Haven police officer whose kid was out at night and snuck back in the house to try to evade responsibility, and she shot her dead.
Well, on a personal level, I remember when I was dating my wife, she came to visit me at college, stayed a couple extra hours. She went back to New Haven and got home, and the house had been ransacked. And one of the things that was taken from the house was the gun that was in the house.
She had a gun?
No, not she. This is her family home. Her father had a gun. I'm sure it was a registered gun. May he rest in peace. He won't have any legal problems. I'm sure it was a registered gun. But he had a gun in his house, and that gun was part of the things they stole from the house. So if Marlene had come into the house an hour earlier or 2 hours earlier, she might have faced somebody who had a gun who might not have had the gun before they broke into the house. So, you know, are they really safe for families? I don't know.
Well, you sound optimistic about the process of gun control. I'm pessimistic given the Supreme Court's makeup.
Well, the Supreme Court's makeup is a little disturbing, but
although John Roberts might surprise us.
John Roberts is an institutionalist, and I'm not going to go to the bank on this one. I think that John Roberts is worried about the credibility of the court.
He still wants to move it right, like on voting rights and on abortion, but he doesn't want to.
He's a very conservative jurist, but he's an institutionalist, and I'm hoping that will override on. Well, some of the things that
maybe he will listen to track 5 of Enough of Steve Mednick's new album, Enough. It's debuting soon, but we're giving you a sneak preview here today on WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven 1 year after the massacre at Parkland. We're listening to some of these songs for the first time, inspired by the Parkland massacre. And Steve Mednick is telling Mr. Roberts and elected officials to say, tell them we are rising.
What are you gonna do about your badge of shame? You lied so long you don't even know where to begin. Your words are empty, they own you lock and key. Please forgive me if I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Can they trust you with their lives? You don't say nothing, you just pray while time goes by. The way things were, they remain the same and never change. There'll be no next time. Your time is passing. Your time is passing. They are tired of your old game. You've done the bidding for those who are to blame. The right to life is just a plea for another check. You did nothing for a living. Tell them they're rising. Tell them they're rising from the bed they've been made. Tell them they're rising from the field that they had sown. Tell them they're rising, we are marching in the streets. We've lost too many lives on your watch. Tell them we're rising.
Tell them we're rising. We're marching in the streets. We've lost too many lives on your watch. Tell them we are rising.
We are rising.
That is track number 5 from Steve Mednick's new album. Not yet released, but you're hearing it for the first time. World premiere. Radio premiere. That's Enough.
Yeah, prior to the world tour.
The
bar
Steve
scene
Mednick's
in
new album,
whatever.
Enough, inspired by the events at Parkland with a gunman in Florida, where a gunman shot up a high school. 70 people died a year ago, and we're still trying to figure out what to do about it. And we're talking about that in WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven, 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenpin.org. Were you doing the finger picking on that?
I was, actually.
Sounded good.
Yeah, thank you.
And and you said some of the albums there are, say in the notes, they've been written in New Haven, some in Hamden. What was the difference?
Oh, it depends where I got the idea. Sitting on a deck, or sometimes in the office, I'll.
So at your law office, you'll pull out the guitar like you're writing a
No,
brief.
I never pull out the guitar in the office. But I sometimes will during lunch hour start drafting something. I do not have a guitar in the office because I do try to practice law full time.
So at
in the
lunch, while
office.
some of us like will be doing the New York Times crossword online or something,
Yeah.
you're writing lyrics.
I'm writing
too.
lyrics to a song usually, and sometimes I live just over the line, so I sometimes put New Haven. I write a lot. I don't know if I wrote any of these songs down south, but I write a lot of songs down south. There are a couple on the album.
Where south?
In Hutchinson Island, down in Florida, where we have a place, and so I end up writing quite a bit down there. But one of the songs, which we'll play in a little bit, was actually written in New Haven. I remember distinctly writing this in 2001, which was about 5 or 6 years before I started writing music. But we'll talk about that when we get to that song.
Which song is that?
The song is "Don't Let the Season Pass."
All right, we will. Then we'll get to that one. Steve, do you write the lyrics first, then in general, and then the music?
No, it depends. In this case, I did. In this case, this is the one song for the Parkland kids that I didn't write for the Parkland kids. I wrote this song right after 9/11.
That was not "Don't Let This Moment
Yeah,
Pass."
don't let not you
Season
know.
Pass.
Yeah, don't let the season pass. I wrote a lyric called "I Can't Let the Season Pass."
Mhm.
That was my observations on what had occurred in 9/11. And as I was writing the album, I came across this lyric, and I said, "Oh my goodness, this would be a terrific kind of anthemic or psalm, almost like a psalm for the children and for all victims of gun violence in America." And it worked out well. So I changed it a little bit, but it was inspired.
But sometimes you write on piano, sometimes guitar, sometimes just the words first.
This album is all guitar driven, and some of it came with words and music.
I forget, you're 66?
I am 66, almost
Okay.
67. Yeah.
You first wrote your first songs as a teenager, correct?
I wrote songs when I was a teenager. I wrote "Rainy Day in Autumn" when I was a teenager.
That's a nice title.
Yeah, it was, and I'd love to find the song somewhere. I have it in my head.
And you used to play at open mics?
I used to play it with Mike as a kid.
You went to Greenwich Village, to Girls Folk City, right?
I never played there. I wish I did.
You didn't do open mic?
No, I never did.
I used to
that.
do open mics there.
Yeah, well, you're cool.
No, we're not. Very
I was-
uncool.
yeah.
Terrible songwriter.
Yeah,
But
no,
I
just
used to
connect-
go there in high school and go to
Yeah.
open mic night.
Yeah. No, so I wrote a little bit then, and I studied.
Did you go to the Exit Coffee House in New Haven?
I did go to the Exit Coffee House, and there was a place in Meriden. Then we had a lot of different.
But
a
you
lot of
didn't end
different
up doing that for your career. You ended up you were an alderman in New Haven. You're very involved in state, local, and national politics. You're a leading municipal lawyer, municipal law, private attorney. A lot of governments hire you. What got you back into this?
When I turned 50, my best friend from childhood called me and said he wanted to reform our band from the 8th grade. The Avengers was the name of our band. Not named after the comic books, but named after the
TV show.
The TV show, Steed, Patrick Sneal, or whatever his name was. Steed. Sneed was the name of the character. And that was it. And my friend Larry loved the actress who was in the show. And that's how we ended up with the Avengers as our name. And so we did that band when we were in 7th and 8th grade. I moved out of Waterbury, and I then just had a folk guitar and played.
You moved out of
some
Waterbury?
guitar. Moved out of Waterbury up
Where
to the Hartford area. I lived in Rockville for 2 years, and then we moved to
I
Newington.
didn't know that. I
for 2
always
years.
thought you were a Waterbury kid.
No, I was, but I went to high school in Rockville, Connecticut.
I didn't even
And-
know where Rockville is. That
Rock-
Eastern Connecticut?
East of the river, east of East Hartford and Manchester.
What kind of place is that?
Well, it was the home of the Rockville Rocket. Gene Pitney from Rockville, Connecticut. It was an industrial town at the time. It's post-industrial today.
Your dad was a butcher, right?
Who's that?
Wasn't your dad a butcher?
No, my father was a produce man. He was a peddler when I was a boy, and had
In Waterbury.
a store in Waterbury, and then had a store up in Rockville. That's why we moved up there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
so
why Rockville?
my mother thought it was the promised land,
Really?
and that
Rockville was
they
the
would do
promised land?
that they would do very well as suburban populations were expanding out of Hartford, east of the river.
This was the 60s.
In the 60s, and I think they were about 10 years too early because the business didn't do so well.
Yeah.
And we moved to Newington, where my father went back to work for a grocery store chain that he had worked at when I was growing up in Waterbury. And so I grew up in the Hartford area for the high school years.
And your 50s, you got back in, and boy, you have been prolific.
Yeah, no, the 50s I got back into
Man.
it. Yeah, and
15 albums you recorded.
yeah, and so once I started playing, I had to learn how to play again because I hadn't played in many years. And so I started playing keyboard in the band and playing guitar and relearning the guitar. And once I started playing, I started hearing music again. And I had, for about 15 years before then, started writing a series, probably hundreds of lyrics Some of them had melodies in mind for music, but I never thought I'd get around to writing them. And then it just started coming naturally.
You really pour your heart out in these songs.
Well, I try.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was thinking, two trends I think about when I hear your story, Steve. People are healthy longer in their lives now.
Mm-hmm.
So, you got people, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, think they can still be president at 87, 86, which I think is a little delusional. But there's no doubt that...
Not 87, 77 and 76.
No, I'm talking about the second term.
Oh, their second term.
They would
Correct.
still be
Yeah.
president long past they have Alzheimer's. But anyway, they might have now. But
But
it is true that we are productive into our 70s,
Yeah.
many of us, some into the 80s, and that 20 more years are considered productive, active years extra on top of what our parents' generation considered.
I hope so.
And that you are right now at an age when other people retire packing in, you really have this new career. You're flowering and being, you tour, you perform, you record, and you, that's something that a younger person in the old days would do. And also the other thing is that independent media. So people who are creative now don't have to be signed to a record label. They don't have to fit into one commercial category. You have found followers for your music around the world on your own through the internet.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's not remunerative. I'm not making a lot of money doing it, but it's great fun. It was interesting.
That's the long tail.
Yeah.
Few people tons of money, but lots of people find followings and audiences for books, for other kinds of writing, for music on the internet through so many more now. Because
it's a passion for me. And, Tony Casagrande and my band talks about, we did a show a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about music and basically he said for Steve and me, it's like golf or bowling. This is what we do with our spare time. I had a conversation because of the age issue 5 years ago or so, maybe it was 6 years ago. I was at a funeral or memorial service out in L.A. for an uncle of mine who had this terrific show called Folk Scene. The show still is on. Yeah. And Jackson Browne performed that, and I had met him a couple times before, and my aunt said, Jackson, Steve is a political guy, but Steve also writes. And Jackson, no, I didn't know that. So Jackson Browne and I have this conversation, and he says to me, at that time I had been, did like 5 or 6 albums in 5 years or something. I said, man, you're prolific. And I said, well, you started when you were 16 with Dr. My Eyes.
He was 16 when you wrote Dr. My Eyes?
He was 16 years old when he started that
I
song.
remember that song. I love that song.
Great song.
But he didn't record it till his 20s, right?
I think he was recorded when he was at 17 or 18. He was young.
Boy, what an old person's song to be written at 16.
No, brilliant.
It's about looking back.
Well, it's like Richard Thompson on The Ledge, Meet Me on the Ledge, which is a song when he wrote when he was 22.
Dylan's Crimson Flames Through My Ears, I'm so much older.
Just sang that song.
Now,
just sang that song last night.
I'm younger than that now.
Just sang that song last night. So I said to Jackson, I have a much more different relationship with mortality than you did throughout most of your career. Now, Jackson's older than I am, but he got it.
And his wife died.
He got it. He understood that this is compulsion. I'm constantly writing it. It's a lot of fun. It's good stuff.
Speaking of fun and good stuff, we're previewing Enough, the new album by Steve Mednick. Not quite out yet, but it's about the Parkland. A lot of it is about, not all of it, the Parkland massacre, the gun massacre at Parkland High School, Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And one of the tracks we're going to hear was not written there was not one of the 7 songs written afterwards, but it's still relevant. It's called...
What is the 7th song?
It's called Don't Let This Season Pass by Steve Mednick on Enough.
Stand together now, we will tame the darkness. Holding hands will help us through the long night. Sitting in silence, we will feed our lost souls in this age of fear. No time for reflection. Take the time you have to embrace resistance. Let the spirit strike you like a lightning bolt.
right, Don't Let the Season Pass from Enough by...
You missed the bells.
Ooh. All right, I kind of blew that one. Sorry.
That's okay. You didn't know. You
A
didn't
short anthemic song, and you see that in a lot of albums. Her Majesty at the end of Abbey Road.
Yeah.
You see Father Night at the end of New Morning. I think maybe my favorite song album ever by Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Where you try to make a big statement with fewer words, less time. What were you thinking of here, and why is this on the? Has this been an album before?
No. This is the first time.
You wrote it in 2001 after 9/11.
Yeah, Reg, I mean, I wrote the concept in 2001. Now, as I look at it, because I have it, I wrote the following. If you give me a minute.
I see the
here.
lyrics.
Yeah. Stand together, we will tame the darkness. That's in the song. Holding hands will help us through the long night. Standing in silence, we will feed our souls in this time of introspection. Take the time to wonder and rationalize where we are and what path we took. Are we that part of the journey where the end of intelligent discussion begins, or do we look into ourselves and do we do each for other for the words and actions we need to pass this test? The blood has been shed, the blood of those lives known and unknown, here and those never to have been, sliced out of our body, out of the world we inhabit. So those words were written, as imperfect as they are, in 2001, kind of a response to 9/11, or as I was thinking about 9/11. And as I was going forward and writing this album, I wanted to write something that was more of a prayer at the end. And I just came across these words. I ended up taking the words and trying to apply them to the incident.
Revisiting what you wrote in a moment, updated it, and repackaged it
for
a new moment.
Now is a song for a new moment. And the singers on it are terrific. I want to give them some credit here. Jen Durkin, who's quite well known, a great blues singer who has the band Jen Durkin in the business. Natalie Mednick, who's been on most of my albums. Natalie's a remarkable singer. And my brother, Tony Casagrande, who's in my band Hard Road.
Your brother?
He's my brother, musical brother.
And then also Seth Adams does your artwork.
Seth Adams done the artwork, and he's not on this album at all.
So you hang out in clubs with a lot of younger people hang out. You interact with a lot of musicians who are your kids' age.
Well, Seth's a little older than my kids.
Are you?
Yeah, he seems younger. But right, Seth? I think Seth seems younger, but he's older than my kids.
All right, so Steve Mednick of New Haven and Hamden has a new album out, Enough. Look for it. It's not available yet. But can they actually sign up in advance to get it?
No, I mean, there's no place to sign up. I'm not.
All right, so
I haven't monetized this
Just look
business.
at CD Baby or Amazon soon about this album. We are marking Parkland a year later. Whatever your politics are, that event sure did get the attention of the country. We feel so badly what happened to the children there and hope that doesn't happen again. Steve Mednick's album, Enough. Thank you for joining us today. What's next? When you come out with this album, are you going to have some kind of CD release event? Are you going to be touring it? Are you going to be promoting it?
I don't know. We just lost our lead guitarist in the band, so we'll have to figure out Vinny Cervoni, and so we'll have to figure out how this is all done.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today on Dateline New Haven. Thanks, Steve, for coming in. Thanks, Yale New Haven Hospital, for providing financial support. We're going to end with "The Whole World is Watching." It's a phrase from "The Whole World is Watching" from the 50 years ago, the riots in Chicago, a police riot against the demonstrators, anti-war demonstrators at the Democratic Convention. One of the irony was that the people who organized that event didn't count on what the world would think when the world was watching.
Yeah.
But you wrote a song inspired by Parkland that uses as a touching off point when they beat up the Yippies in Chicago. Why is that now what you're writing?
Well, this is there were 7 songs on Parkland. Then they follow the 4 songs at the end after the bell. That's the reason I have the bell on the album, to kind of signify that we're moving on. This is really influenced by Lawrence O'Donnell's book from last year. He wrote a book about 1968, and I had wanted to write a song that was on par with Graham Nash's "Chicago" or "Ohio" by Neil Young, and so I tried to write something as if I were writing in that time. So it has nothing to do with Parkland per se. This is a kind of a history that you could dance to.
History you could dance to, from Enough by Steve Mednick. The whole world was watching. And thank you, the part of the world that was listening at WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven.
were playing with fire. Revolution was live on the TV. I was there, the watershed, 50 years ago in Chicago. Piss in the air, blood on the streets, and army and bravado. The whole world was watching. They were swinging their baton. They were beating the yippies. There was no revolution in the sun. The whole world was watching. The pocket was burning. The war was raging. We were playing with fire. Seizing in the morning.